Hi everyone, how are you doing? Good. Last talk of the day. Let's make it through. Alrighty, so thank you very much for making the time for this talk. Evolving together different delivery frameworks for different project phases. I'm going to make a number of points during the talk, but I really hope that you will see a number of things that relate to you, no matter what I'm saying, because I'm going to assume AAA game, but I feel that a number of techniques and other processes that I'm going to discuss, they apply in different situations. And especially I want to leave a lot of time for questions. I feel that that's the most valuable thing to do, especially in this setting. So the talk wants to be way less than 50 minutes. Let's see how it goes. So, who am I? My name is Stefano Martincigh, and this weird accent is because I come from Italy. I perform different roles: Agile coach, development manager, project manager, and I'm really, really passionate about agility and about processes and efficiency. So forgive me if I get really excited when I talk about something that it's not that exciting for the majority of the normal people. I hold a bunch of certifications, Scrum certifications, scaling Scrum, project management, change management, all things that really help me in crafting this talk and help me being what I am right now and doing what I am doing at Wargaming. It's 4 years that I'm working at Wargaming as a project manager, development manager, and agile coach. And mainly I work with distributed development because Wargaming is really, really big. We have more than 20 studios around the world, so a lot of my work is with distributed development. But for this talk, I'm going to assume that there is co-location in the teams. So what is this talk? Our experience at Wargaming, my experience and of my teams. It's not an indication on how agile frameworks should be. Not at all. It's an experience that I want to bring with you. For each project phase, I will first talk about the principles of the chosen framework, then give an idea on how we implement it, and also underline when we implement something that is not really orthodox or it's even bad, but we are still doing it. I have a couple of questions to start with for you guys. So, how many of you are familiar with lean approaches? Okay. How about Scrum framework? Okay. And way of scaling Scrum? Cool. So the first phase, ideation, prototyping. This is the phase where brainstorming has to be the activity, where we want to touch with hands ideas and try and see where we can go next. So Lean Kanban is something that helps us. Then we have pre-production. It's time to develop the systems. And Scrum is a good fit for this in our organization. And lastly, production, where you want to develop a cohesive game. And in here, I'm going to talk about the Nexus Framework. So during this phase, prototyping, the need for maximum flexibility and almost no process can be felt in any industry. I want to make a clarification point. From now on, with the term Kanban, I will refer to the framework Lean Kanban by David Anderson. So what is Kanban? Kanban is a framework and has no set of roles, activities, or artifacts. Kanban does not prescribe cross-functional teams. And the predominant adopters of Kanban are product support teams who are working with highly volatile requirements, which it seems that in our industry is also in production, but let's not get confused. So we're going to talk about Lean Kanban principles. The first one, visualize the workflow so that unplanned work can be spotted and easily managed. The second one is limit your work in progress. This is to foster a mindset of finishing work that has already started. The third one, manage flow. Bottlenecks tend to shift from one point to another within your process. Focus on ensuring that work moves as smoothly as possible. Make process policies explicit. Less confusion to optimize focus on the actual work. And the last one, improve collaboratively. Didn't say that correctly, but you understood it. Team members are encouraged to discuss difficulties, suggest changes, and make them happen. And this is about it. Those are the principles that should guide you. Let's see how they guide us. So for context, Wargaming Sydney wants to develop AAA games. Therefore, for us in the prototyping phase, we're happy we start with a team, around 6 developers, 1 producer, 1 PM for a couple of months. This is our backlog. This is how we visualize order list of ideas. And this is how we track the development of our ideas. It's really important to understand where is at which stage and if you should panic because you're not getting what you should at the moment of testing that idea or developing that idea. We try to have work in progress and queue of tickets on the non-active columns. Sorry, from here it's really difficult. But these are columns where there are actual work getting done because people are doing something. And these are columns where there are tickets waiting to get pulled in. That's another big factor of a Kanban board is that it should be a pull system. And if you see a queue growing too much, there is the point in which you ask people that maybe are doing this job, fantastic guys, you're terrific, you're killing it. Unfortunately, these guys are a little bit of a problem, so please help them and do whatever you can in order to make the work flow as it should. Cycle time is king. Understand on average how long does it take for an idea to be done and used to create new ones. It's really important when you're prototyping to understand, okay, you have these many cool ideas, prioritize them, and how many are you going to go through? And how many of these cool ideas are going to spawn other cool ideas? So the problem is that when here you have something amazing that you want to try out, and you have no idea where you're going to do that, because you don't know how long these are going to take, you start feeling people in the team a little bit agitated because a number wanted to see a lot this, and this is not moving. There are other things coming on top here, so you really need to manage that. In our case, making process policies explicit, it's easy. We come from a Scrum culture, and we basically grab 90% of what is there. All the events, but without the fixed cadence. And by making it explicit, we just maybe have a chart or something that repeats what are these type of events that we're doing and we want to do. Ideally, you would tackle one concept at a time. But we are happy when we have only 2 on the flight. And here I put a couple of colors to give you an idea, is that, okay, these might be slightly different ideas, or maybe yellow is an idea and you need different components. And reality is that you're always limited by your skills in the team. So in order to help each other doing the right things, we often accept the fact that we have 2 in flight. Actually, this is a very nice scenario for us. Sometimes it's happened 3, and then we pay the cost of it. So after a while, we get some core concepts that work well together, and now it is time to address feasibility problems and setting up pipelines. So we're talking about pre-production. At this stage, predictability on the output becomes important. It is vital to have a way to understand cost and time for development of key systems. It is possible to focus on objectives that are clearer with a time horizon of 2 to 4 weeks. Scrum seems a very good fit for this. I'll give a little bit of time to let it sink in. Okay, so what's Scrum? Scrum is a delivery framework and is constituted by 3 roles, 3 artifacts, and 5 events. That's it. That's Scrum. And now I'm going to explain a little bit more about all of this, starting with the roles. And I would love to see more. Maybe. Okay. So we have the product owner. Product owner, in my opinion, is the most difficult role. The product owner has to be right. That's the role. Because the product owner has to take input from the stakeholders, from the dev team, from the Scrum Master, adding the knowledge of the market, and understanding what do we have to build, and what is the sequence that we need to build it for. It's really, really difficult. The product owner has to say a lot of no. That's a good product owner. A good product owner has a clear view of what needs to be done and what is not certain. What do we need to do in order to acquire more of the knowledge in order to build the things that we want to build? So a big part of the product owner role is to build relationship with the stakeholders, which often are powerful and wants to dictate stuff. Having that relationship and being able to walk out of the room having said 1,000 no's and still having their jobs. It's very, very difficult. And then we have the dev team. Scrum does prescribe cross-functional teams. What do I mean by that? Cross-functionality means that the team is able to do the work that is required, A to Z. Or at the very minimum, they know where to find the skills throughout the sprint in order to have a potential shippable increment at the end of a sprint. That's cross-functionality. It doesn't mean that each individual in the team needs to be able to do everything that is needed. But it does mean that your team needs to have all the skills, which in game development is particularly hard because there are so many skills coming in any phase. And then we have the Scrum Master role. This is a complicated role, and also because in our industry, we don't use that word that much, Scrum Master. We use more project manager and for product owner, producer. And it's a little bit complicated. So Scrum Master, no one likes this kind of word. But what does that mean is that is the master of the process. The point of a good Scrum Master is being a servant leader that helps the team improve themselves, helps the team understand the process, how to tweak it, and especially a good Scrum Master have good relationship with the rest of the organization, with the rest of the world, in order to make other important stakeholders understand where are we are at and why do we do certain things, why do we all stand up in the morning and discuss things. It's really, really important that people around us understand it, and it's really important that the team itself can look at how they perform. So the Scrum Master often creates burn up, burn down, release chart, and these type of things. Obviously, in a lot of organizations, you don't have the luxury to have a lot of different people working on something. So one recommendation do not have one person sharing these two roles. Dev and NPO, very difficult. Dev and Scrum Master, very difficult. Scrum Master and Product Owner, you need to have somebody that is able to discuss with themselves. You want a healthy tension between the Product Owner, give me more, give me more. I already said 1,000 no's. At least these two things, let's have it. And the Scrum Master is the reality check. It's like, whatever, but we have this velocity, so pick your battle. And this is it. These are the 3 roles that you need in Scrum. Again, Scrum is a delivery framework. It doesn't solve a lot of problems. You need to know what you're building. You need to have your idea clear. A lot of things this doesn't provide. This is why it's so simple. Only 3 roles. There is no CEO. There is no anything. These 3 roles in order to ship what you want to ship. How do you do that? Product backlog. Product backlog is another word that I struggle with because product is singular, but many of you might be in a situation in which you need to have multiple products and you have one team, and how do you juggle the things? And that's perfectly fine. Within Scrum, the important thing is that you have a listed order of things that you want to do, and you can call that your product backlog. We will see a little bit more about that. Once you have this, then you can have a sprint planning. So sprint planning is a meeting where all the roles are invited to have a discussions and try to understand what's the plan for the next sprint, which typically is 2 weeks, and try to understand what is really achievable and what is just a fantasy. It's a super crucial part of Scrum. If you want to do Scrum correctly, give enough time to the sprint planning. Otherwise, you're going to be frustrated over here, and you'll never solve that. The product owner is the owner of the product backlog. The product owner has the final say on the order of these things. But then there is a meeting, the planning. And after the planning, you come up with a second artifact from Scrum, which is the sprint backlog. And the sprint backlog is owned by the dev team. The dev team understands what do you have to do in order to achieve the overall goal of the sprint. So they own at this point what they have to do. And in general, the dev team knows how to do the things that we want to do. So product owner, what? Dev team, how? And in all of this, the Scrum Master is facilitating all the activities needed in order to come up with these artifacts. For example, something that is not called out specifically in the Scrum Guide is that in order to have a sensible product backlog, you need to have some sort of refinement, and the Scrum Master can help a lot in pulling in the right people at the right moment. So we were here. We have the sprint backlog. Therefore, we know what we want to do. We check that we have the skills. We check at which point in time do we want to do what. We can start. And this is considered an event by itself. It's the length of the sprint. 1 to 4 weeks. Why? Because it is considered to be an acceptable time frame for the business to be out of the way. So protecting the sprint, no new ideas coming in. And we should know more or less exactly day by day what is going to happen. It's only 2 weeks. We should be able to plan for the next 2 weeks. Yeah, that's harder than what it sounds. In order to do that, you want to reinforce your plan, or better, reinforce the idea of we do have a plan on a daily basis. So the team gather together in daily scrums and simply discuss how to move forward for our goals. Now, many of you would use Scrum probably, and you might think that the daily Scrum is about answering 3 questions. What have you done? What are you going to do? What are your blockers? That's not dictated. Do whatever you need during these 15 minutes, that's dictated, don't go longer than 15 minutes, in order to understand where you, as a team, are moving in order to achieve the goal that you set. A day ago, 2 days ago, maximum, in our case, 2 weeks ago. So this goes, and this allows you to have discussion around, yeah, still, we were wrong. We did sprint planning 2 days ago, yeah, wrong. Something has to change. A developer has to jump on something else, and you discuss that, so everybody is aligned every time, and they know what they are doing. At the end of this, you want to have a potential shippable increment. That's a little bit of a tricky word. What does that mean, potential shippable increment? The idea is that you want to be accountable to the business. You want to be able to show progress every time. And one of the values of Agile is that working software is the biggest measure for progress. So you want to have this thing ready to be shipped if need to be. Kind of. In games, it's really, really particular. You need to accept that sometimes you need to have a couple of months of building some systems. So what does that mean, the potential shippable increment? Well, that depends how creative is your product owner. Sometimes you want to take longer route in order to show something and touch something, even in this phase, so that you give a sense of, yes, we are moving forward in an incremental way. And how do you do all of this? In the sprint review. The sprint review is the moment in which you gather, the whole Scrum team gather together, and you invite stakeholders in order to inspect the potential shippable increment. In order to touch with hand, we were there 2 weeks ago, and now we are here. What are the lessons learned, and what are the things that we need to course correct now that we know new things? And then you want to have a sprint retrospective. The sprint retrospective, in my point of view, is the most important event in Scrum. Is where you take time as a team to inspect how do you work, your processes. How do you work within different groups, in the company, in the wider community. It's really important to have good facilitations during these meetings in order to extract the best out of the meeting. If you think about it, it's a very costly meeting. You have all your team there for a couple of hours. You really want to extract value, and you want that people that are outside understand the value that you're generating by constantly improving how do you do things. We are quite mature in our Scrum journey. And as such, most of the guidelines just discussed applies to how we work. Nonetheless, Scrum is easy to learn and difficult to master. As a consequence, most organizations implement ad hoc solutions of it. Now I will present 4 key elements of our Scrum implementation in more detail. So this is a representation of our backlog, which is so-called deep. It's detailed appropriately, emergent, estimated, and prioritized. I tried here to give an idea of the things at the top, hopefully are the most important, and are also the most refined, where it's clear what you have to do and to build. Whereas this blob here, down there, it's something that is not really important at the moment. It can be gigantic, you don't even know, and you don't need to know. Because by the time that you develop the things that are here, maybe you will be able to discard this completely. The whole trick is about that. Like Scrum and Agile, you do things more fast, like kind of. You have more focus, therefore you waste less energy. This is how we want to have a sprint backlog. And the representation here is we strive for a definition of ready, meaning things cannot enter in our sprint if have this shape. If we do not understand what we want to do, but it's time to do it, we don't want this to enter in our sprint. Okay, we do allow things to enter in the sprint, even when they're not really refined, but we do pay the cost. We know that when we allow something like this, it's because we couldn't do right refinement or these type of things. And we are ready to understand that we might miss the sprint goal because we just made a monster enter in our sprint. A little bit more about these little lines. We allow in our sprint backlog and backlog in general, PBIs, product backlog items, that are user stories, tasks, and bugs. So user stories have a natural story component. As a user, I want so that. This is really important to give your dev team the opportunity to solve a problem. This is the problem statement. But then stories, they also have acceptance criteria where you want to close down the possibility of solutions. You need to have kind of APIs between stories so that they fit all together. And we do not have a formal definition of done. So basically, real mature Scrum teams will have an understanding of when this PBI gets done, you know what it means. It's done because it has all the documentation, has been merged in line, and it's live, for example, in your case. In our case, we go more on a ad hoc definition of done. Sprint planning, very important. And I want to take a step back. To be cross-functional, our teams need to have high number of different disciplines experts. Engineering, QA, tech art, 3D modeling, game design, etc. So how do we do sprint planning is a little bit different from the Scrum Guide. We want to have context for everybody, 10, 15 minutes, where the product owner gives a goal, and this is what we want to achieve. And we also try to understand, okay, given that this is the goal, probably these are the items that we want to do. And then we separate in subgroups that form and reform in 2-3 hours in order to really dissect each PBI. And then we regroup for a collective commitment at the end of this event in order to make sure that everybody had their say, inspected the item that they most likely are going to work on, and everybody together like, yes, this is what we want to do, and this is bringing us to the goal that we set for ourselves. In the pre-production stage, we still value flexibility over predictability. We, as in Wargaming Sydney. As a result, we do not protect our sprint very much. We let bugs in and even expedite requests. This is not best practice at all, but it works for us. As a result, our data is not so highly in quality, so we need to be very careful in understanding our velocity and our predictability, but somehow we manage. And then we have sprint review. At the moment, our Scrum maturity does not allow us to have a sprint review as per Scrum Guide. We inspect not only the increment, but most of the PBIs, also things that weren't done. Because we feel that sprint review, it is an occasion to gratify the team, not only focus on the product. So we really want to understand each developer, what was the contribution, and why we arrived at a certain stall or not. So all of the above allow us to maintain a certain level of flexibility while being predictable enough. After a number of months, core systems and key pipelines are de-risked and fully understood. So we find ourselves magically in production. In the previous scenario, one team per system should be enough. Working on system dependency is doable. But now for production, it is necessary to speed things up and to have multiple teams on the same system. There are various frameworks to scale Scrum. Safe, Less, and Nexus are the most established ones. Nexus gives us enough structure, and it is an easy transition from mature Scrum teams. Pause. Look, get amazed by it, and do not let yourself be overwhelmed by this chart. I will not enter theoretical details. The most important concept is striving for integrated increments. These require higher coordination and better dependency tracking. For these reasons, within the Nexus framework, the majority of the Scrum events get double up. One for the group, one for the team. Okay, here, a little bit more complicated, but one for the group and one for the team. One for the group, one for the team. This is basically the key takeaway from Nexus. But let's look at a little bit details of what do we do by it. Delegations are necessary in order to do refinement. And that's fine, not too complicated. Our way of doing sprint planning goes well with these extensions in Nexus because we already have the 15 minutes talk in order to everybody on the same page. The Nexus Sprint Backlog, it's a critical artifact to understand dependencies between teams and PBIs. It's a very difficult balancing effort between investment and clarity on dependencies in order to build something that makes sense. And we still have a lot to improve on this. Don't be fooled by this big circle. The Nexus integration team is virtual and gets reformed at each sprint to better control the interdependencies visualized in the Nexus Sprint Backlog board. Therefore, you have a number of experts for different teams that understood that they are dependent by each other during the sprint, and they discuss on a daily basis what are the blockers. So in the Nexus Daily Scrum, you will have these people discussing what is impacting the whole group, and then bringing back this notion in the Daily Scrums. You might notice that here there is only one sprint review. Yeah, that's not for us. We weren't mature for the Scrum. This is really next level. And in the guide from Nexus, it's prescribed to look only at things that works. And we still need to talk about things that didn't work and PBIs that are not finished. So we are not obeying to the guide. Not saying that we are better than whomever wrote the guide, it's just that that's how we do it. And lastly, this sandwich is not really working for us, too much of a process. So we just have our retrospective in teams, and then we try to gather together and try to understand there were common discussions, which are the common solutions. Let's try to double up or not double up. So, putting it all together. In conclusion, we use different frameworks for different project phases because we feel that each phase has key differences and requires adaptation of our practices. During ideation, Lean Kanban principles allow us to conceive and touch with hand great new ideas. In pre-production, Scrum gives us robust delivery framework in order to proceed in a flexible yet predictable way. With Nexus, during production, we have an effective way of scaling Scrum in order to maximize throughput without stalling over interdependencies and integration problems. Thank you. Questions?
I wanted to know if you had any tips on how to break things into scrums and keep it quite focused rather than letting other work get in the way. Because you mentioned that at one point during the scrum you have to only focus on that and not let other things distract you. So I'm interested how you manage to do that day to day.
Okay, so you mean the sprint?
Yes, during the sprint.
Okay.
Yes.
So that is the work that the majority of the time is assigned to the Scrum Master. So you need to have somebody that is able to establish a good relationship outside of the team, within the team, setting expectations, and try to make sure that you communicate the goal around, and hopefully that goal makes sense also for people that are outside the project. And every time that somebody wants to interrupt, the Scrum Master should have an easy life to say, like, remember the goal, we're trying to do that, come back later. What is more difficult to do is internally, managing the internal turmoil. And I feel that daily Scrum are the answer. If you get your team to get a good cohesion and say, like, in daily Scrum, we talk about how we reach our goal more than what you have done yesterday or what you're going to do today. It's like with the lenses of like how the things that you're doing now are bringing us where we want to. And if you see that maybe there is a little bit of scope creep, there is a meeting after it. That's it. You're welcome.
So you mentioned the daily Scrum. Is that like purely and talking about like not talking about what you did yesterday and what you're going to do today? So does that mean like in the way you've set up your kind of project management, does it mean that like daily stand-ups has been essentially replaced by the daily Scrum, or is there still a place to actually kind of give a project health of like kind of where you've been alongside that daily Scrum? Okay, so let me unpack that. Thank you for the question. Daily Scrum is the name of stand-up, or dailies, or whatever. In the guide is Daily Scrum. And that is an event, 15 minutes time boxed, in which the team determines what to do in order to keep focus on the goal. And what is it? It's really team dependent, culture dependent. If you feel that in your company there is a big emphasis on tracking the project and these type of things, and the whole team feels that it's important to talk about those things, make it part of your daily Scrum. Otherwise, you should have the Scrum Master taking care of it aside the daily Scrum. Yep, that's first. Probably zero.
Thank you. So you talked a lot today about like processes, and I was just wondering, from your point of view, how important you think process is compared to, I suppose, how that's actually actioned. So how to ensure that those processes are being followed effectively, and how like is it enough to just have these processes in place, or do you feel it's more important that whatever processes you choose are being used effectively, and how would you use the processes or ensure that the processes that you're following are being done so effectively? Yeah,
I would consider that a trick question in the sense that people and interactions over processes and tools, it's one of the value of Agile. So scrap all of this. Who cares about that? It's the most important thing is the value and the people that you're working with. And if Scrum works for you, good. If it doesn't, don't. So basically, Scrum wants to be very, very lean, a little set of rules, really precise. Give it a go. In the retrospective, try to find out what went wrong and eliminate that if you don't want it. Just do us a favor, as the entire world, don't call it Scrum. You can take a lot of idea from a lot of places and be upfront to it. It's really fantastic when you, I mean, the Spotify model, they don't call it Scrum, but we change it. It's like the Spotify model. So be proud of your iterations, and you start in a place. Maybe you read a book and you start, well, why not? Let's try this. And then maybe you try Kanban, and then something else. And then you mix them, and you really take care of the culture of your place, and then you make the process fit it. Does that answer your question? Cool. There were a couple of.
Hey, are there any key metrics that you use to sell the value of the sprint retrospective to stakeholders or to the product owner so they can convey that to the stakeholders?
Yes, absolutely. And more than metrics is depending on the level of the transparency of your organization, being able to show what has been discussed, being able to make sure that you show that there was a problem, everybody wasn't happy about it, we did something about it, and now we solve it. That can result in more motivation for the team, and that should be the key metric. So I would work on first on the culture if you don't have that level of transparency, if you don't have team being comfortable, having certain part of the retrospective shown in order to foster it, and then work on the fact that like, hey, those are problems that we were discussing and how hard it is to discuss this problem. And we did it, and we had this action out of it. That's the metric.
You mentioned during the pre-production stage product backlog items as things that get introduced in the sprint that you didn't intend to be in the sprint, and usually try to limit that. I'm curious about once you reach the Nexus part of production, how does that process of like PBI fit into that as well? Because as a producer and Scrum Master almost, I sometimes question how many bugs and how many improvements and how many extra things in the sprint should I really be allowing into the production Scrum sprint before it becomes a problem, right? Until it sort of goes away from the goal. So I'm curious about how that fits into the production process.
So that's a terrific question, and it's really dependent on your organization in the sense that we're talking about production, and we're talking production on scale. Like you use Nexus if you have 3 teams or above, which means that if you have an organization that it's really working with the publishing and they have a date, it becomes really important to hit that date. From my point of view, it's also really, really important not to crunch, which means that it leaves you the opportunity just to be really firm with the goal. Sorry, it wasn't refined, it's not entering. In production is no time for those things. Or if you're working in an organization that is a little bit more flexible around like, yeah, we would like to ship 2020, it happened to be 2022, then you can allow yourself a little bit more slack. Cool. You're welcome. There was another deal.
Thanks. At Wargaming, I imagine you do a fair bit of maintaining delivered products, like putting out updates and patches and things. How does that fit into the frameworks you've talked about, or is it a different beast?
It is not a different beast. So just to be clear, apart from Nexus, where you have to have 3 teams at least to make sense of it, Kanban or Scrum, they would work either ways. And the majority of the time when you're fixing bugs and doing patches, maybe you feel that Kanban gives you a little bit more flexibility and you go with that. Otherwise, other times you can plan a little bit more in advance and use a simple Scrum. To be fair, for World of Tanks, which is the biggest title, we do have several teams working at those patches and whatnot. So there are other tricks to use in order to like, yeah, the patches now it's every 2 weeks, but in reality, we knew what we wanted to do 3 months ago and these type of things. But the principles still apply completely.
So you might just do something like a Kanban board per patch or something.
Yeah, if you want that, or Scrum. Cool. There's one question over there.
Yes, hi. So I have a hypothetical situation here.
Okay.
Let's say I'm a producer and I work at an indie dev studio. We're about 5 to 12 people. I attend this talk, I think, hey, that actually sounds pretty good. I want to take some of that back home. I want to try and implement it in our studio. But the people there, they don't know about Scrum. They're process averse. They want to just work. They want to have as few meetings as possible. 2 questions. One, how would you approach that? What would you try to, how would you try to convince them? And 2, how would you address the product owner, Scrum Master kind of situation with, let's say I have a team of 10. it might not make sense to have a dedicated Scrum Master or product owner. And if am a producer, do I fulfill both roles, or how would you resolve this?
Okay, very difficult question from a colleague. Thank you. So, okay, let's unpack that. Let's assume 10 people team. I am the producer, and I listen to this talk. I'm not going to try to do product owner, Scrum Master myself. I'll try to see who in the team has a little bit of OCD and go with it. So, you need clear understanding of what's going on. How about you can have double hat Scrum Master and dev and try to roll with that. The other thing is that let's minimize disruption. Let's not go on Monday we start Scrum, read the Scrum guide and start with it. Start with Lean Kanban, where there is no process, nothing whatsoever. The first meeting you enter in the office and you go like, okay, everybody, post-it note, what is a big problem that we have on our process? Try it, hopefully you won't have 10 different answers. You have maybe one with 4 post-it notes and you try to act on it. And then let's see how it goes. If you feel that you're not speeding up enough, you can show it. It's like, guys, it's 4 weeks that we try to find some solutions. Are we happier? Do we do things better? No. How about we give it a try to do something? But do invest that month at least to say like, what you guys want to do? How do we fix these things? Do you have a solutions? I would do that.
So fail to create understanding for the situation and the issue.
Yes, so the question was, so first understanding of the situation and then some actions, always. And as I said, culture over process every time. So try to understand what you really need, what fits for you, and iterate on that. Probably last question?
I think that has to have just been the last question because we're at time now.
Okay.
You're welcome.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I'm going to stay here if you have questions.
Yeah, you're welcome to talk to him for a little while, but that's...
Thank you very much.